I came home from a weekend camping trip to find 3-decades-old oak trees lying in pieces across my lawn. A rented wood chipper was still humming on the sidewalk. Karen was standing in my yard, sipping a mimosa. And no, this isn't a movie. This is what happens when a Karen-backed fake HOA plays militia in the wrong neighborhood. Freeze frame, yep. That's me. The guy whose private well HOA Karen tapped into to illegally water her garden. What did I do? I flushed her system with sewage. And oh buddy, that was just the beginning. Let me rewind a little because that story deserves context. I live in what used to be the kind of peaceful, tucked-away mountain suburb where people left fruit baskets on your porch for Christmas and waved from lawnmowers. I bought this house 12 years ago, custom-built it, actually. The land came with a catch: 3 massive oak trees rooted right in the center of the property. But that wasn't a problem. It was the reason I chose it. I'm a landscape architect, and those trees? They weren't just beautiful. They were part of a federally protected conservation easement. I even named them. Quietly. In my head. Yeah, I'm that guy. Anyway, life was good until Karen moved in next door. Karen, whose real name is Barbara but insists everyone just calls me Karen, came in like a blonde bobcut tornado in yoga pants and wedge heels, declaring herself the savior of property values and community spirit. Within a month, she'd wrangled together 4 other equally bored busybodies, made up letterhead, and declared the street part of the Oak Point Improvement Association, aka her fake HOA. No one signed anything. No one agreed to anything. But that didn't stop Karen from acting like she was the law. It started small, of course. A passive-aggressive note taped to my mailbox. Perhaps the oaks could use a seasonal trim? The street is looking a bit dark. Then it escalated to printed flyers. Beautification improves home value. Let's all do our part. Always with a cartoon acorn logo. Cute if it weren't for the veiled threats. Then came the friendly inspections. Karen would stroll down the sidewalk, phone in hand, snapping photos of people's flowerbed. One day, I caught her reaching over my fence to measure the height of my compost bin. I asked her what in God's name she was doing, and she smiled and said, "Just ensuring harmony in the neighborhood." I ignored her. At first, I figured if I gave her 0 oxygen, she'd eventually fizzle out. Big mistake. A few weeks later, she knocked on my door holding what looked like a homemade HOA citation form. Apparently, my trees were now a nuisance to visibility, and may cause emotional distress to residents sensitive to enclosed spaces. I told her, as politely as possible, to shove it. She gave me the look, eyebrows raised, tight smile, like I just threatened national security. That's when I knew Karen was going to escalate. Now, let me explain just how protected those trees were. Years ago, I enrolled this property into a rewilding initiative. There's a small spring running near the base of the hill, used to be part of a migrating bird corridor. Those trees hosted 2 protected bird species and a squirrel population that was being tracked by a university study. I had the documentation, the federal tags, and the laminated certificate. Legally, those trees weren't just mine. They were monitored. Touching them without the right permits was a felony. But Karen? She thought laminated certificates were just things people print off the internet. Things quieted down for a bit. I'd filed a formal complaint against her fake HOA with the county. I figured that would slow her down. Instead, she just got sneakier. Like the time she tried to sneak her gardener into my yard to trim back branches for safety. He was halfway up the ladder before I caught him. I made sure he left with his shears and a very colorful vocabulary lesson. After that, I installed cameras, because I had a feeling it wasn't over. And oh, was I right. The weekend I went camping, just 2 days off-grid in the state park. I came back to what looked like a battlefield. My trees, the giants I'd built my home around, were cut down to stump. A contractor's truck was still parked on the side of the road, trailer gate open, sawdust coating the pavement. And there she was, Karen. in a wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses, sipping a mimosa in a lawn chair she'd placed on my property. She turned to me and said, "Doesn't the street just feel lighter?" I didn't scream. I didn't charge. I just stood there, jaw clenched, taking it all in. The butchered trunks, the piles of branches, the shattered habitat. My birds were gone. The squirrels? Probably scattered or dead. One of the trees had a university tag still nailed to it, now lying in the grass next to a pair of work gloves. I felt something deep in my chest, like grief. That might sound dramatic, but when you've nurtured something for over a decade, it's not just wood and bark. It's part of you. Karen, sipping her drink like she was watching a Sunday parade, said, "I'll send you the invoice. I had to cover removal out of pocket since you wouldn't cooperate." Now, here's the part that made my brain short-circuit. She thought I would pay her for illegally cutting down my federally protected trees. The sheer audacity could have powered the neighborhood for a week. I walked past her without a word. Into the house. Grabbed my file folder from the safe. The one marked Protected Habitat Legal, and started making calls. Not to the police. Not to a lawyer. First to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Then to the state's Forestry and Environmental Crimes Unit. And finally to my contact at the university, the one tracking the squirrel population in the now-demolished oak. I walked back outside. Karen was still lounging, like she was expecting me to thank her for cleaning up. I said, "Hope you kept the receipts. You're gonna need 'em. For evidence." Her smile wavered for the first time. The next day, I filed an official complaint. Not with the county, this time with the feds. And when the forestry agent asked me if I had footage of the removal, I smiled and said, "Better. I've got audio." My backyard camera picked up everything she said to the contractors. Turns out Karen didn't just cut down some trees. She committed a federal offense. And while she was busy planning her next HOA bake sale, I was building a case strong enough to plant her straight in court. But the trees? That was just the first cut. Because what Karen didn't know, what she really didn't know, was that she'd tapped into my private well to water her massive ornamental garden all summer. And that the line she ran? Illegal as hell. And oh buddy, you want to hear what happens when someone feeds off your water without permission? You flush the system. With sewage. But I'll tell you that story in a minute. First, let's talk about how the federal government reacts when someone like Karen goes full lumberjack on protected land. Spoiler alert, they don't bring cookies. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was furious, though I was, but because I was focused. See, unlike Karen, I don't do things impulsively. When I go to war, I don't throw tantrums. I file paperwork. And that paperwork, done right, is the kind of slow-moving avalanche that swallows people whole. By sunrise, I had every document, timestamp, and photo ready to go. The audio from my backyard camera, where Karen was caught telling the contractors, "Just take them down. He'll thank me later," was already backed up to 3 separate drives. My first call of the day was to the Department of Forestry. The woman on the line sounded half asleep until I mentioned the conservation easement number. Then her voice changed. Sharp. Alert. She asked if the trees had been removed in full. I said yes. She asked if the property was still intact otherwise. I said mostly, except for the now decimated microhabitat and a few $1,000s worth of landscape damage. Then I sent her the photos. I could hear her gasp quietly before she said, "We'll be dispatching an officer." That was just the start. Next, I contacted the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They already had a record of my land from the Rewilding Initiative. The biologist I'd worked with 3 years ago even remembered the property and the nesting hawk. When I told him the trees were gone, he went silent. Not a stunned silence, an angry one. He asked if the oak with the aluminum tag had been one of them. I confirmed it. That tree alone had been used for 3 environmental studies over the past decade. Its destruction? That was more than landscaping. That was felony-level interference with a federally registered research site. Within 48 hours, agents from both agencies had visited my property. They weren't in suits. They were in heavy boots and field gear, clipboards in hand, serious expressions on their faces. They surveyed the site, took samples, photographed the stumps, measured the root diameters. I showed them Karen's courtesy notice flyers, which she'd so thoughtfully printed with her full name and HOA title at the top. Then I played them the audio. One agent just shook his head slowly. The other muttered, "People think, because it's their backyard, they're exempt from federal law." I didn't say anything. I just let the weight of their presence do the talking. Meanwhile, Karen was having the time of her life. At least, on the surface. She'd hosted what she called a tree freedom celebration with a few of her HOA minions, complete with cupcakes shaped like axes. I wish I were joking. She even took selfies in my front yard, giving a thumbs up in front of the wood chipper before it was hauled away. What she didn't realize was that by the time those pictures went on her neighborhood Facebook group, they were already in the inboxes of federal investigators. I wasn't sitting idle either. I'd hired an environmental lawyer. Expensive? Sure. Worth it? Oh, absolutely. He was a former EPA litigator with a specialty in conservation violations. When I showed him what had happened, he leaned back and said, "This is not just a fine. This is going to be an example." He drafted a cease and desist letter addressed to the entire HOA board. It wasn't just a friendly warning. It was a notice of potential personal liability for every member who had voted or supported the tree removal. He cited case law. He cited environmental codes. He attached a scanned copy of the conservation easement and made it very clear. Anyone involved could be named in a federal suit. Karen's reaction was predictable. She called a neighborhood meeting, at her house, of course, and tried to rally support. Her narrative? That I was an unreasonable tree hoarder with a grudge against community improvement. She actually used the phrase, aesthetically aggressive vegetation. What she didn't know was that one of her supporters, her own treasurer, had already called me, quietly horrified, and handed over a recording of the meeting. In it, Karen admitted she'd hired the contractors herself and, maybe fudged the paperwork a little. She even joked about forging a maintenance order and claimed the trees were probably diseased anyway. That recording, combined with my own, painted a very clear picture. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate act. Within a week, Karen received her first letter from the Department of Forestry. Not a bill yet. Just a notice of investigation. A big, official-looking envelope that screamed trouble. The HOA received a similar notice. The board called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but I heard about it anyway. Apparently, panic had set in. The reality of personal liability was starting to click. That fake HOA suddenly felt very, very real. Then came the call from the university. The biology department that had been tracking the squirrels? They'd officially withdrawn from the project due to habitat destruction. That alone triggered a secondary review by the State Environmental Office. And here's the kicker. Because the project was partially grant-funded, the university was now considering legal action to recover damages. That meant not only had Karen cut down trees, she jeopardized a funded scientific study. You can't make this stuff up. Of course, Karen didn't back down right away. She doubled down, marched up to my door with a stack of documents, badly printed, barely legible, and tried to claim I had failed to post protected site signage. I laughed. Right in her face. Then I handed her a laminated placard I'd posted on the back gate 2 years ago. Faded, sun-bleached, but still visible. Right next to the university research notice. She stared at it, blinking like it had just appeared out of nowhere. Then turned around and stormed off without a word. I knew what was coming next. Smear campaign. She went online. Started posting in neighborhood group. Claimed I'd sabotaged her garden. That I'd manipulated the federal agents with faked evidence. She even called into a local talk radio show and told them I was harassing her. What she didn't know was that every public lie she posted or spoke only added fuel to the fire. My lawyer was keeping receipts. So were the agencies. Then, right when I thought she couldn't get any bolder, I caught her gardener, again, sneaking into my yard. This time with a hose. I was about to go outside and unleash hell when I realized something. He wasn't watering anything. He was connecting something. I followed the line. It ran across the fence, into her backyard, and straight into a splitter from my private well system. Oh no. She wasn't just stealing water. She'd installed a hidden valve system to siphon from my property. For months, while publicly calling me a threat to community values, she'd been tapping into my private well to keep her imported lavender bushes alive during a water restriction. And the moment I realized it, I smiled. Because unlike the trees, which were protected by federal conservation law, this fell under a whole different set of legal categories. Theft of utilities, trespassing, property damage, and if I wanted to get creative? Oh, I could get real creative. I didn't yell. I didn't knock on her door. I just made a phone call. Not to the authorities. Not yet. First, to a friend I'd helped with a property design years ago. He worked for the local sanitation department, and he owed me a favor, because if Karen wanted to water her yard with my system, she was about to find out what happens when you cross the wrong valve. You'd think after getting a letter from the Department of Forestry and having her name added to an active investigation by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Karen would at least try to lay low. Maybe keep her mouth shut, stop trespassing, and stop turning my life into a low-budget legal drama. But no. Karen, being the fearless suburban warlord she imagined herself to be, decided now was the time to escalate. Again. The morning after I discovered her illegal irrigation setup tapping into my private well, I woke up to find my mailbox had been yanked out of the ground and tossed into the ditch. Petty? Absolutely. Effective? Not in the slightest. What she didn't know was that while she was planning another HOA newsletter about harmonious hydration, or whatever nonsense she was cooking up, I had just activated the most beautiful form of suburban revenge: municipal compliance. It started with one favor. A quick phone call to someone who knew the ins and outs of our town's sanitation systems better than anyone. The guy owed me from back in the day when I'd redesigned his backyard to keep his pool from constantly flooding. We were even. Or at least we had been. I explained the situation. Told him Karen had illegally tapped into my system and was using my water, unmetered, unpaid, and unauthorized. He let out a long, low whistle and said, "Well, that's not just theft, that's contamination risk." Which, in city worker terms, is like yelling fire in a theater. Within 2 hours, I had a written statement confirming that such a setup wasn't just illegal, it could qualify as a public health violation. If cross-contamination ever occurred, and her side leaked back into mine, I'd have grounds for a full-blown civil and criminal complaint. Now, I didn't go nuclear immediately. That's not how you play this game. No, I let her keep using the water for just a little longer. Just long enough to install a little surprise in the system. A redirection valve, installed by a professional plumber, that rerouted anything pulled from that line into a very specific source, an unused gray water tank on the side of my property. And that tank? It had recently been used for septic system backflow testing. Let me put it plainly. The next time Karen ran her sprinklers, she'd be fertilizing her lavender with recycled sewage water. Legally, it wasn't even tampering. The valve was entirely on my side of the system. I had the plumber's certification. I had my own water source. Karen had stolen from me. I had simply returned the favor. The results were immediate. And disgusting. 2 days later, her prized garden smelled like a portable toilet at a chili cook-off. Her grass began to yellow. Her decorative ivy started to droop. And her outdoor yoga group? Cancelled indefinitely. She tried everything. More fertilizer, spraying it with perfume, even bringing in a landscaping company to diagnose the issue. But nothing worked. because the system kept pumping tainted water, and the more she used, the worse it got. The best part? She couldn't prove a thing. When she finally figured out the water was coming from my property, she stormed over in a fury, fists clenched, ready to unleash some HOA-fueled tantrum. I met her on my porch, calm as could be, sipping a lemonade like I was hosting a garden party. She yelled, "You poison my garden!" I smiled and said, "Karen, you've been stealing from my private well for months. I didn't even know until last week. But hey, if you want to file a report, go ahead. I'm sure the authorities would love to hear how you installed illegal piping across property lines." She sputtered, stammered, turned a color I can only describe as rage mauve, then stormed off. I called after her, "Make sure to use gloves when you're pulling those plants. Gray water can be tricky." That was the moment everything shifted. Karen had always seen herself as untouchable, the queen of cul-de-sac compliance. But now she was rattled. She stopped smiling in public, stopped walking her little dog past my house. The confidence had cracked, and the federal agents hadn't even finished their investigation yet. Then, one glorious Tuesday morning, they did. It started with a knock at her door. Unmarked car. 2 agents in plain clothes. I watched from my front porch as Karen opened the door, looking confused. She stepped outside and they showed her their badges. I couldn't hear everything, but I saw the way she froze. The way her face dropped. One of them handed her an envelope. She tried to argue, gesturing toward my house, probably throwing me under every imaginary bus she could, but it didn't matter. These guys weren't interested in HOA drama. They were building a case. Later that afternoon, I got the call. The Department of Forestry was issuing a formal violation notice to the HOA. Estimated damages, $87,000. Karen, as the acting president and signer of the contractor form, was being held personally liable for $15,000 of it. And that was before the potential restitution for the university grant. There was a hearing scheduled. They asked if I'd be willing to testify. I told them I'd be happy to, but warned them I tend to get very emotional when people destroy endangered wildlife habitat. Karen's empire began to collapse from the inside. The HOA board, now terrified of being dragged into a federal lawsuit, turned on her faster than a cat hearing a vacuum cleaner. A vote was held, quietly behind her back, and she was officially removed as president. Her little HOA club? Dissolved. The flyers stopped. The notes stopped. The passive-aggressive inspections came to a sudden, screeching halt. Neighbors started coming out of the woodwork to tell me their own stories. Turns out Karen had fined someone for painting their garage door too bright. She'd yelled at a teenage boy for parking slightly crooked. She'd even once threatened to tow a neighbor's food truck trailer from their own driveway. Everyone had a Karen story. No one had ever dared to push back. Until now. One neighbor, Marcy, brought me banana bread and whispered, "You're like the HOA assassin. You're doing the Lord's work." Another slipped a thank you card into my mailbox with a gift card for coffee and a single line, "Please never move." But Karen wasn't done just yet. Her final Hail Mary came in the form of a lawsuit. She filed it herself, without a lawyer, claiming emotional distress, property sabotage, and slander. She submitted copies of her destroyed garden photos and printouts of our neighborhood Facebook posts. My lawyer laughed when he read it. He filed a motion to dismiss that was so thorough, the judge didn't even schedule a hearing. Just tossed it out within a week and slapped her with court fees. At this point, she was out thousands, publicly humiliated, and left with a garden that smelled like a truck stop bathroom. And still, she hadn't hit rock bottom. Not quite. Because the final blow was poetic. After all her obsession with views and aesthetic harmony, the restoration plan for my property included planting not just the original trees, but 20 new saplings. All native, all tall, all fast-growing, and all planted in a design that, when fully grown, would form a wall of green that completely blocked her prized mountain view. And the best part? She had to pay for it. That's right. As part of the HOA's restitution agreement, Karen and the board were financially responsible for replanting efforts. Every tree, every shrub, every penny, and I made sure the landscaper included a custom note on the receipt. Scenic View Obstruction Package, Deluxe. Karen thought cutting down my trees would improve the neighborhood. Instead, she made sure the whole street knew exactly what kind of parasite she was. And the forest? It always grows back stronger. You'd think, after the lawsuit failed, after the federal fines hit, and after her own neighbors voted her out of her imaginary HOA kingdom, Karen would finally retreat. Curl up in her gaudy sunroom with her tacky throw pillows and sip her disappointment in silence. But no. Karen, true to form, made one final attempt to salvage her shattered legacy. She started a petition, an actual clipboard, door-to-door style petition, to restore community order and property value harmony. Her pitch? That the neighborhood needed structure and that I, apparently, was a menace to suburban balance. She claimed my reforestation efforts were aggressively personal and that my restored tree line was a hostile environmental act. Her words, not mine. To her credit, she actually convinced 3 people to sign. And I think 2 of them misunderstood what they were signing. But most just shut the door in her face. One guy told her, "Lady, he planted trees. You destroyed a federal conservation site. Maybe sit this one out." Another neighbor called the police. Not on me, but on her, for harassment. She finally stopped when someone threatened to put her petition efforts on social media, and she realized the world outside our neighborhood didn't think HOA dictatorship was a noble cause. Meanwhile, the restoration efforts on my property were in full swing. The forestry agency partnered with a local eco-contractor to plant 20 native saplings, plus underbrush, pollinator plants, and even a couple of nesting structures for birds and bats. The plan was stunning. It wasn't just about replacing the 3 oaks Karen had butchered, it was about rebuilding an entire ecosystem. And it was happening fast. Every time I looked out my window and saw that green wall rising again, I felt something that almost resembled peace. But it wasn't just restoration. It was revenge too. Because I'd worked with the contractors to design the layout just right. A tight pattern of fast-growing trees, some that would reach 30 feet within a couple of years. Thick placement. Overlapping canopies. All perfectly arranged to grow directly between my house and Karen's. From her second-story deck, the one she'd built specifically to admire the view, she now saw rows of leaves. And they hadn't even fully grown in yet. One morning, I caught her outside staring at the wall of green, arms crossed, mouth tight. She stood there for 10 solid minutes, then went back inside without saying a word. A week later, I got a letter in my mailbox. Handwritten. No envelope. It read, "You've made your point. Maybe we can start over. Neighbor to neighbor." I didn't reply. Instead, I laminated it and nailed it to the inside of my shed, right next to her first HOA citation. But poetic justice wasn't done with her yet. The university filed its own civil suit, not against the HOA, but against her personally. They cited loss of research material, time, and data, and requested reimbursement for grant funds lost due to the habitat destruction. That was a 5-figure number all on its own. Her insurance didn't cover it. The university didn't settle. The case dragged on, but eventually she had to sell one of her investment properties to pay it off. I didn't cheer or gloat. I just stood in my yard, planting milkweed for the butterflies, knowing the ecosystem was healing, and so was the neighborhood. What came next was almost peaceful. The air felt lighter. People smiled more. Neighbors started having casual chats again, like they used to before the HOA madness infected everything. Someone even hosted a block party, the first in years. Karen wasn't invited. She watched from her window as we grilled burgers, played cornhole, and laughed like people who actually liked living here. The silence from her property was its own kind of music. Months passed. The saplings grew taller. My garden came back in full. The hawks returned, new ones, younger ones. A pair even nested in one of the new trees. The university biologist sent me a handwritten thank you note and a print of one of the squirrels they'd tracked before the destruction. Apparently, a few had survived and returned. That photo went on my fridge. Then something happened that, honestly, I didn't see coming. The new HOA, yes, a real one this time, formed legally with community vote and oversight, approached me. They wanted me to join the advisory committee. Not as a board member, but as a sort of environmental consultant. Someone to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. I said no at first. I'd had my fill of drama and passive-aggressive policy. But they insisted. Said they wanted someone who actually knew the land, someone who had earned the community's trust. And, to be honest, a part of me liked the idea of using what I'd learned to make things better. So I joined. Quietly. No title, no flyers. Just a voice in the room that said, maybe we don't need to micromanage people's lawns. A voice that reminded people that sometimes the best improvement is leaving nature the hell alone. Karen, by this point, was a ghost. She still lived there, but rarely left the house. The only time I saw her was when she'd step out to water her now pitiful garden, still trying to revive those lavender bushes. They never bounced back. I overheard a new neighbor once ask her why her yard smelled weird sometimes. She muttered something about poor soil and went back inside. And me? I kept living, kept planting, kept watching the canopy rise higher every season. I built a treehouse, yes, an actual treehouse, in one of the new oaks. Not for kids. For myself. A quiet spot to sit and read, or sketch designs for clients, or drink coffee while watching squirrels reclaim their kingdom. It overlooked Karen's yard. I didn't plan it that way. But I also didn't not plan it that way. Every once in a while, someone new moves in and asks about the massive green wall between our yards. I always smile and say, oh that's the result of one woman's fight for a better view. And when they laugh or ask what I mean, I just tell them to ask literally anyone on the street. Karen came for control, and she lost everything. Her power, her influence, her beloved view. But more than that, she learned the same lesson every self-appointed tyrant eventually learns when they mess with the wrong neighbor. You can cut down a tree. You can poison a garden. You can steal water, spread lies, and bully your way into leadership. But you can't outsmart a guy with a memory like mine, a legal file thicker than a Bible, and absolutely nothing left to lose. The roots always run deeper. And when they grow back, they don't just reclaim the land. They block the view, build shade, invite life, and remind everyone exactly who won. Karen wanted an open horizon. Now all she sees is green.